Hello, welcome to the Bella Infidelity Stories channel, where we present authentic narratives filled with surprising turns. If you appreciate the video, please consider subscribing and giving it a thumbs up. It truly supports the growth of our channel. Now let's immerse ourselves in the narrative. I have dedicated more than 5 years to my role at the company. While it may not be the most glamorous position, it provides financial stability, and I appreciate the camaraderie with my colleagues. The routine offers a sense of ease and familiarity. I'm just an ordinary person, honestly. Nothing extravagant. I experienced marriage once, but it didn't go as planned. About a year ago, my ex-wife and I went our separate ways. We have 2 teenagers, and they reside with her. To be honest, I'm perfectly okay with that. I find no issue with solitude. It's simply the way events unfolded. So, I arrive at work one Tuesday morning just like any other day. I pull into the parking space, take hold of my bag, and make my way into the building. The moment I step inside, the heaviness of yet another lengthy day settles upon me. I eagerly anticipate slipping into my work attire, immersing myself in my tasks, and then heading home. I stroll down the corridor leading to the locker room. For years, I've navigated this locker room with ease. I stow my belongings in the locker, slip into my work uniform, and step out to embrace the day ahead. There's nothing out of the ordinary regarding that. Except for today stood apart. I swing the door to the locker room wide, and right there in the center, something catches my eye that I never anticipated. Laura, the wife of my boss, stood before a mirror, meticulously adjusting her attire. She was in a state of partial attire, neither completely clothed nor entirely bare. A mere hint that renders the entire situation profoundly uncomfortable. For a moment, I stood still. I found myself at a loss for what to do next. It was one of those instances when your mind simply malfunctions. The door had just begun to open, and there she stood, Laura, my boss's wife, in a revealing state. In that instant, it dawned on me what had transpired. I stumbled upon a scene that was never meant for my eyes. I'm not foolish, however. I understood that this wasn't a wild, flirtatious encounter. This was simply an unfortunate and clumsy turn of events. I swiftly retreated from the locker room. I forcefully closed the door behind me and took a step back, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Oh my goodness," I whispered softly to myself. I paused for a moment, attempting to comprehend the events that had just unfolded. What on earth was she doing in the locker room? She was a stranger in this place, unfamiliar and intriguing. Was she merely stopping by the office? Was she in search of someone? Little did I realize, but what I did know was that I had just committed one of the most uncomfortable blunders of my existence. I found myself at a loss for what to do next. I anticipated her to come out and say something along the lines of, "Oh, it's not a problem," or "It occurs sometimes." However, that is not the case. The locker room remained quiet. My heart raced in my chest while I attempted to maintain an air of normalcy, despite the undeniable truth that everything was far from it. Throughout the morning, her image lingered in my thoughts, refusing to fade away. A wave of embarrassment washed over me, as if I had committed a grave mistake. And to make matters worse, I had no idea how she would cope with it. Was she really going to act as if it never occurred? Would she really keep her distance from me from this point forward? I was completely unaware. I thought it best to stay focused on my tasks, maintain a low profile, and wish for this situation to pass quietly without further discussion. However, just a few days later, the situation began to take a strange turn. Laura began to change her behavior towards me. At first, it seemed subtle, but gradually I started to see it more clearly. She would glance my way in the hallway, offer a subtle smile, or initiate casual conversation more frequently than before. It crossed my mind whether her actions were intentional. Perhaps she was attempting to ease my discomfort following the entire locker room situation. Yet, It had evolved beyond mere small talk. It was truly extraordinary. I noticed her stealing glances in my direction more frequently, and I could feel an unmistakable tension hanging in the atmosphere. It eluded my grasp, yet its presence was undeniable. It wasn't just me who observed that. My colleagues began to tease me, inquiring if I was receiving any preferential treatment from Mrs. Robinson. Naturally, Robinson is my superior. At that moment, a revelation struck me. Perhaps this situation wouldn't resolve itself as swiftly as I had anticipated. Following the entire locker room incident, I reacted just like any guy would. I attempted to act as if it had never occurred. I returned to my regular schedule, clocking in, completing my tasks, and maintaining a low profile. However, circumstances had become more complex than they once were. Laura, the wife of my boss, began to treat me in a different manner. Initially, it was merely understated. Little moments, such as a smile exchanged as we crossed paths in the hallway, or a slightly prolonged gaze when our eyes met at the coffee machine. I don't typically delve deeply into matters, yet this was difficult to overlook. And then it took a turn for the bizarre. She would approach my desk, engage in casual office chatter, and effortlessly guide the discussion towards more personal matters, such as how my day was unfolding or whether I'd watched any interesting films recently. It was far from ordinary. She used to be different. One day she strolled over to my desk once more, cradling a cup of coffee in her hands. As I wrapped up my project, my focus unwavering, I sensed her gaze lingering on me. "How is everything unfolding?" she inquired, resting against the boundary of my cubicle. Her voice was not merely friendly, it carried a warmth that enveloped those who heard it. "It's a bit too warm, if that resonates." "All is well," I responded, attempting to maintain a relaxed demeanor. It was clear she had something else on her mind beyond just work. "Well," she remarked, a faint smile gracing her lips. After a brief moment of silence, she continued, "You know, I've been reflecting on it, and I truly believe you're an exceptionally dedicated worker, Ryan. Your commitment has not gone unnoticed. It's wonderful to witness that." She fixed her gaze on me for a moment, and I sensed my heart begin to race. Was this merely a compliment, or did it carry a deeper meaning? I let out an awkward chuckle. "Thank you. I simply fulfilled my responsibilities, as you might expect." "I understand," she said, tilting her head just a bit. "However, it encompasses much more than that. I believe you have great promise." The manner in which she expressed it conveyed that it transcended merely my efforts. Something more lingered in the air. A silence that lingers. I was at a loss for words. I sensed there was more to her kindness than met the eye. An unmistakable subtext lingered in her words. I attempted to dismiss it, convincing myself that I was merely over-analyzing the situation. Perhaps she was merely attempting to be amicable, or perhaps my own insecurities from the locker room incident were clouding my judgment. Regardless of the situation, I found myself unready for what unfolded next. A few days later, Laura approached my desk once more. This time she was a bit more straightforward. "Hey, a new eatery has opened up in the downtown area. Have you come across it?" she inquired, her eyes scanning the office. "Perhaps we could arrange to go at some point. How about we take a moment to enjoy a meal? Only the two of us." Her tone was relaxed, yet I sensed it was more than merely about the meal. It seemed like a beckoning, a quiet one, yet a beckoning all the same. I stood still. I didn't foresee this coming from her. Having spent considerable time in the office, I can tell that a request like that didn't just appear out of thin air. She was, after all, the wife of my boss. She was more than merely a colleague. I'm not sure," I stuttered. "Well, you see, I have quite a lot on my plate at the moment, you know," she smiled, as if she was determined to get her way. It's merely dinner, Ryan. We are both mature individuals in this situation. Take your time. I believed it could be enjoyable to deepen our acquaintance. In that instant, I understood that this was far more than a mere act of kindness. This transcended the ordinary. She was genuinely sincere. She was genuinely interested in me. I was unsure of how to approach the situation. I wasn't just an unsuspecting fool. I was able to perceive the unfolding events. The reality of her being married to my boss added an extra layer of complexity to the situation. I never imagined I would end up in a situation like this. Having navigated a tumultuous divorce, the last thing I wanted was to find myself entangled in workplace conflicts. Yet the undeniable connection between us was palpable. It was present, and it was undeniable. I reminded myself to exercise caution. I needed to maintain my space. However, Laura was proving to be quite a challenge. The harder she pulled, the deeper my temptation grew. There was something unique in her demeanor, alluring, self-assured, and perhaps a touch overly tenacious. Following our discussion, I made an effort to concentrate on my tasks. Yet each time I lifted my gaze from my workspace, she was present, gazing at me with that familiar, understanding smile. It became increasingly difficult to maintain the facade that everything was fine. I was uncertain about the direction this was taking, yet there was one truth I held firmly in my mind. I found myself at a crossroads, caught in a moment that had the potential to transform my entire existence. And deep down, I questioned whether I was truly prepared to let it go. At this point, I had dedicated several weeks to reflecting on the dynamics between Laura and myself. I attempted to persuade myself that it was merely a figment of my imagination. I was over-analyzing her actions. Yet, the harder I attempted to escape it, the more tangible it grew. It was more than merely her words. Her gaze held a certain intensity that captivated me. Her laughter lingered on my jokes, stretching just a bit beyond what was necessary. And the way she would lean in while speaking, as if there was something intimate hidden beneath the surface of the small talk. I struggled to maintain my concentration on my tasks, but it proved to be quite challenging. Each time I entered the office, her presence was impossible to overlook. It wasn't just me who sensed the underlying tension between us. Some colleagues exchanged light-hearted banter, murmuring quietly when I wasn't around, inquiring whether I was receiving preferential treatment from Mrs. Robinson. It lacked humor, yet it didn't diminish the reality of the situation. Then, one afternoon, the call arrived. Once more, Laura found herself at my desk. On this occasion, her demeanor had changed. The conversation had moved beyond trivialities. Authenticity is key. It was evident she had a plan brewing. She rested against the edge of my cubicle. Her voice became softer. It was as though she sought to craft an intimate experience. "Ryan, I've been pondering," she started, her eyes filled with fervor. "I understand that the situation is intricate. I understand you collaborate with Rob, and I realize this may not be the most prudent choice, but I'm unfazed by that. I believe you are a person I would enjoy spending time with." My heart raced, and a flush crept across my cheeks. I found myself cornered, with no escape from this dialogue. The confines of the office seemed to tighten around me, suffocating and oppressive. "Laura, I have some doubts about this." She cut me off, her voice piercing yet composed. "Stop acting as if you aren't experiencing it as well. We are both aware that there is a connection between us. No matter how much you try to hide it, I can see the way your eyes linger on me, and I understand that you're not entirely unaware of my feelings." I took a deep breath. It felt as though she had the ability to see into my thoughts. The allure was impossible to resist, yet I had to keep reminding myself that this would be a monumental error. I found myself drawn into a situation that felt entirely wrong, not solely due to its moral implications, but because it had the potential to obliterate everything I had tirelessly built. my profession, the perception others have of me, all things. I'm not. I began to speak, but she interrupted me once more. You don't need to say a word, she murmured gently. However, I believe it would be great if you joined me this evening. We might simply engage in conversation, allowing us to understand one another more deeply. No obligations involved. The invitation lingered in the atmosphere, dense and palpable, much like a heavy mist. The burden of it bore down on me, heavy and unyielding. Every fiber of my being was urging me to decline, yet there was a part of me that yearned to venture forth, to discover the possibilities that lay ahead. It had been ages since I experienced such a vibrant sense of existence. My marriage had ended long before we officially separated, and I haven't truly connected with anyone since that time. Laura was presenting a unique opportunity. Something thrilling, a perilous situation. The ticking of the clock resonated in my thoughts as I considered the possibilities. I have the option to step back from this, establish my limits, and continue forward. Yet I found it impossible to ignore the attraction she held over me. It transcended the physical realm. It was deeply moving. I was fully aware that this was a boundary I ought to respect, yet, at that instant, I was uncertain if I possessed the resolve to turn away. I just don't know, Laura, I replied, shaking my head. This seems off. Yet she refused to accept a negative response. Her gaze became tender as she moved nearer. I'm not requesting anything substantial, Ryan. Only dinner. A dialogue. If you choose to leave after that, I will comprehend. However, I believe it's important for us to make an effort, at the very least. The weight in my chest grew heavier by the moment. Deep down, I was acutely aware that this was a terrible choice. Yet as I gazed at her, it dawned on me that I was uncertain about my desire to leave. A part of me yearned to agree, to embrace that jump and discover the path it would unveil. At last, I let out a breath, fully aware that I had already ventured too far into this situation. Very well, only dinner. That concludes everything. Laura beamed with delight. A surge of relief washed over me. Intertwined with an inescapable feeling of remorse, I found it impossible to let go. I had a strong feeling this would not conclude positively. Yet for the first time in ages, I found myself indifferent. I failed to consider the repercussions. Just this instant. Just what lay before me. As she turned and left, I stood there. A sense of regret washing over me for the choice I had made. Yet I couldn't help but ponder what the night might unfold. On the evening of the dinner, I found myself in complete disarray. Attempted to maintain my composure, reassuring myself that it was merely a dinner. Nothing else to add. Simply a conversation between two individuals, yet beneath the surface, I understood that this was not the reality. This transcended mere description. From the very beginning, Laura had been unequivocal. This was destined to be more than an ordinary dining experience. She yearned for something greater, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of intrigue about where this might lead. I reached the restaurant slightly ahead of schedule. I really didn't want to arrive late, particularly given the tension that had already built up between us. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt an overwhelming sense of disconnection. The ambiance exuded sophistication and warmth. It was the sort of venue designed to leave an impression rather than for a laid-back dining experience. And then I laid eyes on her. Laura appeared absolutely stunning. She wore a deep red dress that accentuated her figure beautifully, and her makeup was impeccable. She appeared entirely different from the woman I had encountered in the office. This revealed an unfamiliar aspect of her character. She appeared graceful and self-assured, yet there was a hint of fragility in her gaze that I had overlooked previously. She transcended the role of merely being the boss's wife. Upon catching sight of me, her face brightened with that radiant smile. A smile that rendered everything else insignificant, slipping away into the periphery. "Ryan," she said, rising from her chair, "it brings me such joy that you decided to join us." I managed to return a smile, attempting to conceal the unease that was slowly rising within me. "Absolutely, Laura. I absolutely can't miss it." We settled in and the dialogue began smoothly enough. We discussed the dining establishment, the cuisine, and the atmospheric conditions. Standard casual conversation. Yet I sensed the palpable tension that lingered in the air between us. A subtle hint of unexpressed thoughts. Each time our gazes intertwined, it seemed as if a spark ignited between us. I attempted to convince myself that this was not right. This was far from an innocent dinner among colleagues. She was in a marriage, and I was employed by her spouse. This might bring everything to a close for me, for the two of us. Yet she was not making it simple. With every ticking second, Laura appeared to draw nearer. She leaned in as she spoke, her voice dropping to a softer tone, nearly personal. I endeavored to concentrate on the dialogue, yet it proved challenging, as each word she uttered seemed like a soft murmur intended solely for my ears. "You know," Laura said, taking a sip of her wine, "I've always held a deep appreciation for those who possess a clear vision of their desires in life. Your confidence in your journey has always been evident, Ryan. It's invigorating." I adjusted my position, attempting to set aside the increasing unease. "I suppose I just aim to maintain simplicity," I remarked. "Concentrate on the essentials." She nodded, her eyes locked onto mine. "I appreciate that quality in you. You keep things straightforward." A moment of silence lingered in the air. Then she remarked, "I believe that's what initially attracted me to you." I was at a loss for words in that moment. What can you possibly say to a comment like that, especially when it's coming from your boss's wife? My heart raced, the tension mounting with each passing moment. Yet, there was an additional element, a sensation akin to a pull, a magnetic force that I found impossible to ignore. She was right there, and the pull between us was impossible to overlook, especially after what had happened in the locker room. I never intended to experience these emotions, yet here I am. "What is it that you desire, Laura?" I inquired, my tone emerging a touch more cutting than I had meant it to be. The instant the words escaped my lips, a wave of regret washed over me. Yet she appeared unfazed. Indeed, she inclined herself further still. Her lips were slightly parted, hinting at the weight of words she was on the verge of sharing. "I desire," she hesitated, her gaze meeting mine. "I long to experience that vibrant sense of life once more, Ryan. I've been trapped in this existence for ages, merely drifting along. Yet in your presence, during our conversations, I sense that there are greater possibilities awaiting me. A tightness coiled within me." This posed a significant risk. She had moved beyond the topic of dinner. She was discussing a different topic altogether. It was more than mere small talk. This was an intricate matter, a culmination of emotions that had been simmering for some time. I took a deep breath, attempting to suppress the rising sensation within me. "Laura, this doesn't seem correct." I spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. "I have some reservations about proceeding with this." She reclined, her demeanor becoming gentler. "I understand this is intricate, but there are moments, Ryan, when events unfold for a purpose. We are mature individuals, and we both understand the situation at hand. No one is being harmed." I had my doubts about that. Thoughts surged through my mind, exploring every potential outcome. What might unfold if someone discovered the truth? What will become of my position? regarding her marriage. Yet as I gazed at her seated opposite me, it dawned on me that I couldn't simply turn my back. I had already overstepped by consenting to this dinner. Now that I found myself in this situation, I felt uncertain about how to retreat. The temptation was too strong. I had already ventured too far in. The remainder of the evening unfolded with conversation, laughter, and a deepening connection. As the night drew to a close, I found myself uncertain about the state of affairs. I was uncertain whether this was merely a fleeting occurrence or the onset of something far more perilous. All I could focus on was her, and the thoughts just wouldn't fade away. As we left the restaurant, Laura turned to me, her hand brushing against mine. "I'm glad we did this," she said softly. I echoed the sentiment, fully aware of the untruth behind my words. This was far from finished. The journey was just starting to unfold, and now I had to figure out how to get myself out of it before it was too late. Following that dinner, everything changed, yet neither of us could articulate how. Laura and I maintained our understated exchanges at the office. The subtle interactions when eyes were averted, the quick looks that conveyed deeper significance than any spoken language could express. A part of me trembled at the thought of our actions, while another part was irresistibly drawn to her allure. Her presence, her allure, the way she made me feel as if I were the sole focus in the room. Yet, as our bond deepened, the burden of our hidden truth loomed large between us. Each time our paths crossed in the office, each time I caught sight of Rob moving through the halls, a wave of guilt washed over me. We were ensnared in a facade, and an unsettling sense lingered that it could all unravel at any instant. One morning Rob summoned me to his office. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as he sat at his desk, his expression grave yet devoid of anger. I was completely unprepared for what lay ahead. Ryan began, his voice unwavering. "Your future here has been on my mind lately." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I could see the direction this was taking. He was going to offer me that promotion I'd been working for. I had worked hard for this moment, and it was finally within reach. As I sat there, absorbing his words, the guilt gnawed at me relentlessly from within. Rob went on to say that he believes you should have much greater responsibility in this place. Your dedication to your craft is truly commendable. You've been a solid asset to the company for years now, I acknowledged, yet my thoughts wandered far away. I found it difficult to concentrate, to uphold the polished facade I had dedicated so much time to refining. My mind was consumed by thoughts of Laura and the hidden truth we shared. The dread of being found out was overwhelming me. Later that afternoon, I spotted Laura in the hallway. She stood by the elevators, her mind adrift in contemplation. Upon catching sight of me, her demeanor became gentler. "Are you okay?" she inquired gently, her tone just a breath above silence. I was at a loss for words. Was I okay? In what way might I be? Understanding our actions, realizing that each moment shared drew us further into a realm I wasn't certain I could manage. Yet I found myself unable to turn my back on it. I didn't want to. I'm uncertain. I confess. It seems as though we inhabit entirely separate realms, one where all is well and one where we're merely anticipating the inevitable downfall. Laura let out a heavy sigh, her gaze mirroring the concern that weighed on my heart. I understand, but what actions are we meant to take? It feels as though we're caught in a loop, unable to halt our progress yet unsure of how to move forward. That was the issue at hand. We had crossed a threshold and retreat was no longer an option, yet the destination remained shrouded in uncertainty. A part of me felt compelled to suggest that we should leave it all behind. We ought to conclude this before it becomes any more intricate, before it jeopardizes both our lives. Yet there was another side of me, the one that had been quietly yearning for her over the past few weeks, that wished to cling to what we shared. What we shared was extraordinary, one of a kind, even if it remained hidden from the world. Perhaps we should continue on, I proposed, softly. Perhaps we should simply let it be, keeping it to ourselves. We carry on in this manner, yet we remain oblivious to what lies ahead. Not at this moment. She gazed at me for an extended moment, as though measuring her own emotions against the repercussions of our actions. I'm not sure if that's sufficient, Ryan. I'm not sure how long I can maintain this facade, I acknowledged, with a nod. I grasped her meaning. Living in shadows was challenging, yet the thought of relinquishing it all, of turning my back on everything we built, seemed even more daunting. That evening, we gathered in a secluded nook at a local bar, the spot we frequented during those infrequent moments when we could break free from the office for a brief respite. We lingered in quietude for a moment, each ensnared in our individual reflections. I feel lost and uncertain about my next steps, Laura admitted, shattering the stillness. I find myself pondering this, realizing that it can't continue like this. Yet I also feel reluctant to bring it to an end. I share that sentiment. I spoke, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. I have no desire to cause pain to anyone, especially not to Rob. Yet I find it impossible to simply erase this from my mind regarding you. We sat there for what felt like hours, not saying much, just drinking and letting the weight of it all settle in. At last, I found my voice. Perhaps we don't need to have all the answers at this moment, I suggested. Perhaps we should maintain this secrecy for a while longer, navigating each day as it comes until we discern our next steps. At first, Laura remained silent, but eventually she nodded, her eyes reflecting a blend of sorrow and relief. Perhaps that's the extent of our options. We didn't know what the future held. We were uncertain whether we could navigate this path successfully or if it would ultimately unravel. For the moment we had one another, and that was everything that counted. As we exited the bar, our fingers grazed against each other, and for a fleeting instant it seemed like everything would turn out just fine. We lacked the answers. We were uncertain about what the next step should be. But for the first time in a long time, we weren't alone in this anymore. We ventured into the unfamiliar side by side, unaware of the destination that awaited us, yet fully embracing the present moment, finding solace in our shared stillness. Ultimately, we refrained from making any significant choices. We pressed on, quietly, uncertain of what the future held. And maybe that was the truest action we could take.